My name is Laura. Ever since I was a child, I've loved my dad, Michael. He always put our family first and put himself second. He made sure that neither my younger brother, David, nor I ever felt deprived, and he handed over his entire paycheck to my mom, Betty, a stay-at-home mom, so she wouldn't have to struggle, never complaining even when he had no spending money for himself. Thanks to my dad, David and I had fulfilling and happy lives. I thought the four of us would continue living this way forever. But fate can be cruel. The dad I adored passed away suddenly. It happened when I was a high school senior, and David had just started 8th grade. That day, Dad headed to work as usual, but he suddenly collapsed at his workplace and was rushed to the hospital. By the time David and I arrived after receiving the call, he was already cold to the touch. An hour later, Mom arrived. While David and I were sobbing uncontrollably, Mom seemed strangely calm. Although she was clearly shocked by Dad's sudden death, she didn't shed a single tear. "Mom, what are we going to do now? Dad is gone." Mom was a stay-at-home mom, which meant she had no income. Without Dad, our family couldn't survive. Mom didn't answer my question. "Hey, Mom, are you listening? Dad is dead." Then she let out a deep sigh and snapped.
He's dead. What do you want me to do about it? Can you stop yelling? It's giving me a headache.
What did she just say? What do you want me to do about it? Dad's death? Sure, no one could have predicted this, and it probably couldn't have been prevented. But to talk like that about the man who supported us all these years? That's just too cruel. For the first time, I felt disgust toward my mom. I'd always thought she was selfish and leaned on Dad too much. But I never imagined she'd stay so cold, even in a situation like this. My mom smirked mockingly as I glared at her.
What are you glaring at me for? It's not like he died because of me.
This was the beginning of a nightmare for David and me. Right after Dad's funeral, Mom started bringing a strange man into our home. We lived in a rented apartment, and this man soon took over the room Dad had used. Just like that, our daily lives were turned upside down. Mom and her lover openly treated David and me like nuisances. If anything displeased them, they would yell at us without hesitation. Mom didn't even bother to stop him. She just stood there grinning. This hellish situation dragged on for months, pushing both David and me to our limits. Mom had always controlled Dad's paycheck, skimping on his allowance. Apparently, she had been secretly stashing part of his earnings into her own account, which she was now using to enjoy herself with her lover. I can't live like this anymore. For David's sake, I have to find a way to change our situation. With that thought, I decided to look for a part-time job. One day, as I was thinking about giving up on college and starting work right after graduating high school, a man claiming to be a lawyer visited our home.
This is something Michael entrusted me with during his lifetime.
The lawyer pulled out my father's will.
Michael left a will?
Mom seemed shocked, clearly unaware of this, and surprised by the lawyer's sudden visit. The lawyer explained to us.
It seems Michael noticed early on that something was wrong with his health. However, he said, "If I don't work, my family won't be able to manage. That's why I want to leave this just in case something happens."
The lawyer opened the will in front of us and explained it in a way even we could understand.
Michael intended to allocate his $200,000 estate as follows: $100,000 to Betty, $50,000 to Laura, and $50,000 to David.
Upon hearing this, Mom's eyes lit up, and she eagerly questioned the lawyer.
So, when will we get the money?
Once the formalities are completed, it should be deposited soon.
Mom immediately grabbed a pen and signed the necessary paperwork. For David and me, the details were a bit over our heads. But if there was an inheritance, we were grateful to accept it. Later, David and I decided to leave the house. We were done being at the mercy of Mom and her lover. I began thinking about what we would need for the two of us to live on our own and what the bare minimum requirements would be. If we're moving out, we'll need to find a place to live, but will anyone rent to a high school student? While I was stressing over this, I remembered that the parents of a middle school friend owned some apartments. The next day, I visited her house and explained the situation to her parents. So, as you can see, we have my dad's inheritance, and I'm planning to start a part-time job. Could you help us find a good apartment? In response, they said,
We can't sign a formal rental contract with a high school student, but we could let you rent one of the apartments we own. You just need to pay the rent every month. How does that sound?
"Yes, absolutely. That would be perfect."
If anything comes up, don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Though they were worried until the very end, my strong determination must have convinced them, as they ultimately decided to support us. That night, I brought up the topic with Mom. "Mom, David and I are leaving this house soon.
What are you planning to do after you leave?
We'll live together, just the two of us." It was clear that Mom couldn't care less about David and me. Without even glancing in my direction, she coldly responded,
Fine, do whatever you want. I don't care what happens to you two. Honestly, it'll be better for me if you're gone. I won't have to deal with you interrupting my time with him.
At that moment, any lingering feelings I had for Mom completely shattered. "All right, I get it. Thanks for everything, Mom." I delivered the words dripping with sarcasm and left the house I had lived in for so many years. Living with David on our own turned out to be much harder than I had imagined. I started my mornings delivering newspapers, then went to school, and after coming home, I worked a part-time job at a grocery store. I didn't want to touch the money Dad had left us, so I tried to cover our living expenses as much as possible with my earnings. At the grocery store, they let me take home unsold deli food, which became our dinner. David was a middle schooler and at an age where he'd want to hang out with friends, so I made sure to give him a small allowance every month. "Here you go, David. This is your allowance for the month."
But Laura, you're not spending anything on yourself.
"Don't worry about me. Having fun is an important part of growing up, okay?" Even when David hesitated to accept it, I insisted on giving him his allowance. I knew we couldn't provide him with the same financial comfort as before, but I wanted to at least do this much for him. That life continued for a while, and soon the season turned to winter. My classmates were all talking excitedly about their plans for college. To me, that felt like an unattainable luxury. All I could think about was where I would work after graduation and how I could support David so he could go to college. One day, I happened to have a rare day off from my part-time job, so I was having lunch at home with David. Suddenly, the apartment intercom buzzed. Who could that be? When I opened the door, I was shocked to see my mom standing there. Mom,
You don't get to call me that. Now, where's the bank book?
what? Bank book? I was completely thrown off by her sudden arrival and demand. Ignoring my confusion, she barked.
Hurry up and give it to me.
She yelled with such anger that it was terrifying. Wait a second. Why are you suddenly asking for this? But she wouldn't listen. Instead, she pushed past me into the apartment and started rummaging through the rooms.
Stop it, Mom.
Shut up.
David tried to grab her arm to stop her, but she shoved him aside. I rushed to David's side, shouting at her repeatedly to stop. Eventually, Mom found the bank book in one of the drawers. Seeing the nearly untouched account balance, she smirked triumphantly.
There's quite a bit left. You're a smart one, just like me. Well done.
When I glared at her with disgust, she clearly didn't like my attitude and shoved me.
What's with that look? Just shut up and do what I say. I'm your parent.
Mom took both my and David's bank books and stormed out of the house. I sank to the floor, overwhelmed with frustration. Why? I worked so hard to get this far. Why does she have to destroy everything again? The peaceful life I had finally built with David. I didn't even touch Dad's inheritance, working myself to the bone for David's future education.
Laura,
David came over and sat quietly beside me as I cried. I felt so ashamed that I couldn't even protect my younger brother. Then suddenly, I remembered something. It was a letter the lawyer had handed me when he visited.
Michael asked me to give this to you secretly, without Betty knowing. He said, if you ever find yourself in serious trouble, open this.
The lawyer must have understood the situation with Mom because he discreetly slipped me the envelope without her noticing. After moving in with David and being so busy with our new life, I had completely forgotten about it. I opened the letter from my late father and read its contents. It contained an address. It was far from where we lived, in an area I couldn't even picture. Still, if Dad had left it for us, there must have been a reason. Resolving to find out, I decided to go to the address with David. We took a train, then a taxi from the nearest station. When we arrived, we found ourselves standing in front of a grand house with a massive gate. It was something straight out of a movie or TV show.
what the? This house is huge.
David looked just as overwhelmed as I felt, staring in awe at the enormous property. As we stood there, unsure of what to do, a stern-looking man came out from inside.
Who might you be?
Well, we have a letter from our father, and it had this address written on it. After explaining the situation, the man made a phone call.
Please come in.
A moment later, his demeanor completely changed, and he invited us into the mansion. We were led to a large sitting room where an elderly woman was seated. As soon as she saw us, she greeted us warmly.
You must be Laura and David. It's nice to meet you. I'm your grandmother, Mary.
Grandmother? David and I exclaimed in unison, unable to hide our shock. Dad had never mentioned his family, and we didn't even know if he had a mother still alive. But that wasn't all. We never imagined that Dad's family home would be such an enormous mansion.
Does your being here mean Michael has passed away?
I nodded slightly in response to Mary's question. Well, before I could say anything, Mary interrupted and pulled out a large bag, handing it to me.
This is something Michael entrusted to me. He told me to give it to you if you ever came to see me.
When I opened the bag, it was stuffed with wads of cash like I'd never seen before. Ignoring the shock on David's and my faces, Mary continued.
A long time ago, Michael and I had a huge fight, and we were estranged for years. But about a year and a half ago, he suddenly showed up, left this bag with me, and disappeared.
According to her, my dad's family, Mary included, was part of a Mafia lineage that had been around for generations. Dad didn't want to take over and ended up cutting ties with Mary after a massive argument. Hearing that they were part of the Mafia suddenly made a lot of things click. That gate. No wonder it looked like that. Finding out my dad's family was part of the Mafia was shocking enough, but this new development was equally unbelievable. Maybe Dad had known about Mom's infidelity all along. As for the inheritance, there was only so much David and I could do as minors. The allocation of funds was probably just a formality. What Dad truly wanted to leave us was Mary's address written in that letter. Dad had devised this plan to protect us in case anything ever happened. Moved by his kindness, I couldn't hold back my tears. I took my time explaining everything to Mary. How Mom and her lover had treated us terribly. How she had stolen the inheritance Dad left us, and everything else. After listening to the full story, Mary told us,
There's no reason for you to give up on your life because of that mother of yours. I'll make sure to get that money back for you. So you focus on living your own life.
David and I gratefully accepted the bag Dad had left behind and returned to our apartment. With this money, I could send David to any college he wanted. On top of that, Mary promised to cover my college expenses as well. Thanks to Dad and Mary, my dream of going to college, which I had almost given up on, came true.
Laura, I'm so happy for you.
David said, smiling warmly at me. Even though he's had to endure so much himself, it's all because you stuck by me and worked so hard too. Thank you, David. When I thanked him, David blushed and sniffled awkwardly. A few days later, Mary visited our apartment and returned the bank books Mom had taken from us. Apparently, she had used her connections and employees to track Mom down and recover them. That's the Mafia for you. A little scary to imagine, though.
I made Betty promise to never come near you two again. You can live your life in peace now.
Thank you, Grandma. But how did you?
That's not something you kids need to worry about. From now on, just live your lives to the fullest.
As she left, Mary encouraged us with those words, giving us the strength to move forward. There's an epilogue to this story. As for Mom's lover, it turns out he was only after her money. After Mary recovered the bank books, he quickly dumped her. With Dad's inheritance spent, Mom is now desperately searching for a job. Having lived her entire life as a stay-at-home mom, the road ahead will undoubtedly be harsh for her. By the way, thanks to Mary, peace has returned to our lives. I was able to get into my first choice university, and even now, I continue working part-time, doing my best not to rely on Dad's money. Later, I became a working adult, and David started college. Now that we've come this far, I feel like we're finally safe. My childhood was long and painful, but kind people were always watching over us. Dad's lawyer, the couple who rented us the apartment, our Mafia grandmother, and of course, our beloved Dad. Dad, we're heading out. Every morning, David and I speak to Dad's portrait. From now on, David and I will keep supporting each other as we move forward. Please keep watching over us from heaven, Dad. Dad's portrait seemed to smile back at us, as if offering his blessing.